Welcome to Slash Forward. In this episode, we're going to assess how to beat the traps from Saw 4, aka Jeff's epic adventure. Be sure to hit the like button in support of Jeff's innocent daughter. To start, I'll unpack the storyline to see what we can learn. Let's get to it. We open on a man's hairy body in ultra-high resolution. The coroners provide a modesty towel and get to work on John Kramer's corpse. As they peel back his skull flap and begin the Y incision in brutal detail, we wonder if we're being shown all this just to confirm his death is for sure or because it's a trap. This is clarified when they do find a tape inside his gut, which he had previously snake swallowed because you boys got skills. It's a message to the last man standing, confirming that no one will go untested in the end. A man then wakes up inside a mausoleum, but he doesn't know that because his eyes are sewn shut. He's chained to another man with his mouth similarly sewn. Oh, it's an icebreaker. I've played this before. Freaked out about his moaning roommate, he starts chucking tools at him. We see that the duo has a lock and key situation going on here, but our sightless beast starts playing tug-of-war, releasing the go pin from the central machine, causing it to start reeling them in. Naturally, matters of this nature are solved via combat, so when Mouth starts trying to get his partner focused in on the task, he ends up squirting for it. With all bets now off, he viciously takes the key, makes his bro pay for his obstinance, and then unlocks his collar. Hard transition to a SWAT team penetrating a classic Jigsaw-style environment. Having learned a few lessons along the way, they check everything carefully and send in the bomb robot first. It slides on in there and stretches its neck, bringing Carrie's corpse into view, which sends Rigg in recklessly, as he's eager to begin the mourning process. He thought she may still be alive, and realizes now that this was silly. He and Hoffman then get deep about what it all means. On his way out, Hoffman then meets agents Perez and Strahm. Turns out, Carrie was their liaison. Their last message from her was a clue.
Open the door, you will find me.
Based on a quick assessment of the scene, they're confident Amanda had someone helping her, and now they're on the case to sort this all out. Back at the station, we get some indication of John's foothold in popular culture. Hoffman arrives and we learn that Jigsaw's ex-wife, Jill Tuck, has been a suspected accomplice before, and then he encourages Rigg to go home and leave the detective to the detectives. We also learn here from the agents that Carrie indicated 2 officers might be in danger. When Rigg gets home, his wife Tracy is leaving for the weekend to help her mom out. Another family responsibility shirked as he stays behind to stew over recent events. That evening, there are definite signs of an intrusion in his apartment. Thinking it must be Tracy, back early and ignoring him, he and his bulging traps explore his living quarters, and he is ambushed. Staying on theme here, Hoffman is seen putting a mini-tape into an envelope before a familiar pighead appears behind him as well. Rigg then wakes up in his own tub, snags himself a towel hook he hopes to permanently install in someone else's body, and then proceeds slowly. His first tripwire just turns on the VCR, and we learn that his obsession with saving everyone is the wrong choice for maximizing his quality of life. So now he's gonna have to face that down. He's hit with the revelation that 6 months later, Eric is still alive and hanging above a block of ice with Hoffman tied up next to him. Rigg's gonna have to learn to let go to truly save them, whatever that means. Then he hits another tripwire, and this one just sets off his global timer. After that, he proceeds through a hall of photos to find a victim in a chair. The adjacent TV turns on, sans tripwire, and tells him he can win this one by walking away. Instead, he removes the costume, which triggers a tripwire, setting the industrial gearworks into motion and pulling the victim's hair into the machine. With no cutting implements available in one drawer, he opts to shoot the machine into submission. This only works a little, and as the gears turn, numbers begin to reveal themselves. At the precinct, they get back a set of prints from Carrie's crime scene, and they're a match to Rigg, sending them all toward his apartment, where he managed to acquire the combination and release poor Brenda with only a partial scalping. He goes to get her a comb and mirror to see if she can style around her new hairline, and returns to her stabbing at him with a knife. He roughs her up a bit just to get her to stop. He checks her tape to learn her game was to kill him to avoid prison for some unspecified crime. He then finds keys of 2 varieties before heading out the door. Circling around, Eric and Hoffman wake up as the heat lamps come on, and we flash back to see that after his altercation with Amanda, Eric was put in a cell and fed like a dog to keep him alive all this time. Back at Rigg's place, they find Brenda taking a nap on the floor, and as indicated by Carrie's tip, they find pictures of 2 officers, likely in trouble as Hoffman is not answering his phone. They wonder if Rigg is a victim or accomplice, and then Strahm notices without even looking that there's a picture that doesn't fit the others. This tips them off that it may be time to go visit old Jill Tuck to see what she's been up to. They get her in the room where she plays Perez like a fiddle, making her seem not innocent. Meanwhile, as Eric slides around on the ice, working on his abduction muscles, a mysterious man enters the room and saddles up to the monitor bay, and just in time to watch as Rigg arrives at a seedy motel that matches one of his keys. In the room, he finds a box that enlists him to become the pigman and put the front desk worker into his own test, which he must then solve on his own. This proves to be undifficult, as Rigg just lures away his dog to distract him momentarily and then draws down on him. In interrogation, we learn that, as a younger couple, the pair was engaged in the purchase of several large buildings for their various business endeavors. One was a rehabilitation clinic Jill ran. Another they had was mostly a furniture-making operation in preparation for their baby. And even when times were good, John spoke in whisper tones.
You don't want to do that.
Snapping back to now, the pair proceeds into the next room, which is decorated in a rather provocative manner. There are photos of torture strewn about, which are the fruits of Ivan's labors. Rigg's only job is to force him onto the bed so he may begin his test. As a pervert voyeur, he's being given 60 seconds to press a button that will either eliminate his eyes or his limbs. While Ivan screams his way through this, a clue causes Rigg to think back to his early days as a beat cop, a job title he takes literally when matters of child abuse are afoot. Back at the interrogation, we learn that John liked to have everything planned out just so, even down to aligning the conception of his child with the Chinese zodiac. Oh, he's one of those kinds of guys. Late one night, Cecil returns at closing for his jacket and then forces his way in to get at them drugs. In his haste to escape, he inflicts mortal trauma. John is unable to do anything, taking away a huge lesson from this period of his life.
You can't help them. They have to help themselves.
But the questioning is interrupted by an alert to the newest crime scene. Strahm starts to connect some dots here, believing that Rigg is in the process of being recruited. The room was rented under the name Art Blank, an attorney who owns several properties. The first address they acquire happens to be not too far away. When they get there, they find some folders and a camera, which implies...
Where are the two Jigsaw targets?
Back at the Jigsaw command post, Hoffman decides to call it quits and tries jumping off the ice block. This reveals that the platform is balanced by his position, putting Hoffman at risk of electrocution. We also find out here that the helper is a recent acquaintance of ours. He was also the attorney for the child-abusing father. He came for blood, but Hoffman already covered Rigg by signing a statement alleging the father took the first swing.
We'll come back to you.
And since Eric can't remember if he ever said anything that might be relevant to the situation, he agrees to behave himself. Following the prior clue, Rigg arrives at the now derelict building where it all started for him and follows the indicators. He finds the mother-father duo from his flashbacks strung up with an arrow holding them together. When she wakes up, we learn she was offered the chance to finally cut herself loose from her loser husband. Pulling out the arrows would be agonizing for her, but would result in him bleeding out. She wastes no time calling forth the eye of the tiger, but ends up passing out at the last one. Rigg is not to interfere here unless she learned her lesson sufficiently. As he examines the area, he finds a picture of his wife with a G on it in a font that's been popping up throughout the day. So he hands off the key and hits the fire alarm for her on the way out. As the FBI examines the scene, they learn that Art Blank was the attorney for all the victims they've come across so far, as well as Jill. Then they get word that one of Art's other addresses is a building co-owned by him and Jill, and it's right where they are right now. They sneak around and find Billy with a message. It warns Perez that her partner will kill an innocent man, so proceed with caution. And then it playfully blasts her in the face, taking her out of the game, but not before she hands off a key to Strahm. Back at the main trap, Eric loses consciousness, attracting Art's attention. When he gets in closer, Eric strikes like a serpent, but this is just a minor annoyance. He's not getting out of this. Art then confides that if the last guy passes his test, they're all getting out of there, implying he is a victim as well. Then he gives Eric a choice. Back at the office, Strahm trashes his workspace, which is lucky because it results in a Sherlock moment for him. He then keys in hard on Jill, who reveals via flashback the trio's connection. They were all business partners designing low-income housing to help people. John walked away from it all, blaming Jill for losing their child. He got his fateful diagnosis not long after, and she lost touch with him soon after that. Despite not being around, she's able to flashback specific details of Jigsaw's genesis. We watch him think through and develop his methods, build future traditions, and gain confidence. He managed to get Cecil into a razor chair where any movement risks opening his veins. But he's also provided a helpful tool for escape. All Cecil has to do is lean forward hard enough, and his restraints will be released. He goes back and forth, but he gets it done. Unfortunately, his rage becomes his undoing as he lunges and falls into a little box of razor wire John had laying around. Zooming back forward a bit, we see that afterward, John cares for nothing anymore, casting Jill off completely so he can be alone with his traps. Ready now to cut to the chase, Strahm insists on Jill providing him the location of the building they all owned that was named after her unborn son, which happens to be exactly where Rigg is rolling up to right now. Back at the ice trap, the gang takes a moment to observe their surroundings in more detail. They now recognize that the front door is rigged in a way that's different than expected, and someone coming through it represents a clear and present danger. As they anticipate someone's arrival, Art reveals that he's still engaged in his blood test. His job is to be ready to hit the release button once the timer runs out, so long as no one comes through that door. Meanwhile, Rigg is soaking in all the lessons surrounding him while Strahm pulls up to the warehouse. Right when they all seem to be converging on one place, Jeff shows up? Oh, right! And the noise he creates causes Strahm to turn back and pursue him. He hears activity behind a door and bursts into the end of the last ending and shoots Jeff. Rigg then makes it to his door and Eric tries to warn him away, firing on him as he bursts through the glass and shoots Art. This triggers Eric's sudden demise and Hoffman narrowly avoids going crispy. Now, with everything already screwed up, he figures it can't get screwed up more and shoots Art when he makes a move for a tape player. It reiterates that Rigg's job was to not save anyone. They were to save themselves. He should have just gone to be with his wife. At his lowest point, it's then revealed that Hoffman was the other disciple. He set up Amanda so he could be the number one, and had this scavenger hunt running concurrently with the events from Saw 3. He then casually strolls by and closes Strahm into the other room, and as we get a broader perspective on what's going down, it's revealed that the autopsy from the opening took place at some point after everyone else was already dead, leaving us to wonder which movie will cover Jigsaw's activities between the time Hoffman closed the door and when the autopsy occurred. This one has my mind racing and thinking about how some of the other unaddressed plot points will fit into the broader picture as we move along. I'm a little bit over the whole are they in the same place but at different times whiplash reveals. Just stick to the mystery points, please. But enough of that, we have to pick apart these traps and prepare ourselves for the possibility of being forced to navigate the sick mind of John Kramer. To start, we have to lay down some general rules and assumptions. In this installment, we're following someone else who's gallivanting about town inserting himself into other people's tests. His test was to do nothing, but it's not clear if this was always an option or not, or what could have been done otherwise. So we may have to look at some of these from the perspective of whether they were beatable on their own, or if they required Rigg's presence. We'll also have to mess around a little bit with consideration for the perspective of other parties involved and what their motivations may be, because there's a lot of messy randomness in the way these traps were all connected. There are two tests that lie outside of Riggs's trials, so we'll look at those first, starting with the opening mausoleum tug-of-war. It's very unfortunate that Art succeeded here against this other guy who did something, but we're not sure what, only to be dragged back in again to be the showrunner for the festivities that unfold. But at least he was able to rack up one last dub, which is not something granted to everyone. This trap falls into the inelegant category. It appears designed solely for the purpose of creating a Thunderdome-like atmosphere. We don't know anything about the involved parties up front because there is no tape. There's no automatic TV that turns on. There's nothing here that really explains why they're here or what the rules of the game are. I mean, the only tripwire they had was the one that started the central winch. Really kind of a minimal tripwire effort here. Anyway, I know I say it constantly, but I can't overstate the importance of gathering information. Yeah, it's probably alarming to wake up with your eyelids sewn shut, but Eyeballs over here immediately starts flailing around like someone told him he had a bee on his back. Just calm your tits, bro. There was literally nothing happening at all until they accidentally jerked out the pin. I feel that a lot of the responsibility resides with the mouth in this scenario. Art in this case, because you're the only one who can really tell what's going on. Also, the eyelids are soft and pliable, and the muscles that control them are tiny. It's unlikely you could release your lids through sheer force of will. Incidentally, Art managed to do this to his mouth at the end, after it was too late. In addition, there were tools aplenty here. One of them looked like a small hatchet. It's probably easier to cut your mouth stitches without injuring yourself than it is to cut your eyelids open while leaving the balls unmolested. If you keep things chill, and especially if you release the mouth, this trap poses almost no danger whatsoever. Of course, if things go sideways, being a proficient martial artist will carry you through. The other independent trap was the razor chair. Interesting that this was presented as an early trap, because it's also one of the few recently that has a pure message attached to it with a simple premise that requires sacrifice and will but is completely winnable. You wake up tied down to this chair and struggling to try to free yourself is not recommended. You already have blades inserted into your legs and and wrists, and too much movement will just open them up. Luckily, Jigsaw is right there to guide you through, providing clear instructions so you understand why you're there and how you may get out. Of course, the method for escape is daunting, but the level to which this one was locked down pretty much precludes the possibility of escape outside of doing the thing. So you start by choosing a path and then only do it once. If you're going in face first, you do not want to hesitate or move back and forth. Then, hope John set the tension correct so you don't just end up vivisecting your own head. If you make it through, you'll have learned a valuable lesson and will have some bitchin' scars for later. At some point after everything heals, you will look like an absolute badass, a sort of grizzled, scarified tiger. After that, Cecil also taught us all a valuable lesson, which is to never forget gratitude. This ultimately was his downfall and makes a strong case for maintaining a gratitude journal in your normal life, which also puts another point in the column of constant preparation. Next are Rigg's trials. To look at him, we have to take a broad approach. His test, which wasn't necessarily a trap, was simply an encouragement to step back and learn to let go. Nothing would have ever happened if he had taken a few days off to be with his wife, and presumably things would have straightened out again if he diverted and left in the middle. The real issue here, aside from his own drive to try to be active in all situations, is the question of whether or not he can trust Jigsaw's rules, which tend to be vague and have double meanings. Based on the outcome with Brenda, it seems like Jigsaw really meant what he said, but after that, it gets a bit muddy. He's led to taking an active role in Ivan's punishment and arrives at the abusive couple after everything has already happened. At both scenes, he acquires more evidence to move him forward, but doesn't really get any contraindications that are strong enough to overshadow the fact that his buddies are all tied up and teetering on the brink. So someone like him is probably going along regardless, just to see how things unfold and try to see if he can affect any change in the outcome. This brings us to the hair trap. It's imperative here to fight the urge to do something right away. Brenda's release is contingent entirely on someone else being there, so we won't even approach it from the perspective of her escaping on her own. The primary takeaway here is the value of efficiency of action. The mask was off, the gag was out, and nothing was happening. As long as nothing is happening, be very deliberate and measured in what you do next, because it was removing the blanket that sprung the trap. This was Rigg's apartment, so an essentially uncleared area. Yeah, he had an empty drawer, but he also had a short time limit. If he didn't have the time factor, who knows what he could have found. It seems warranted to do a more thorough check for anything sharp, or possibly something long and sturdy he could cram into the gearworks to jam them up. Everything looks so industrial here, but the mechanism has to have a power source, and that source is either plugged in or limited in size based on available space. In other words, power can be cut, or it's not quite as indestructible as it appears. It's also not clear why shooting it would cause it to stop and then start back up again, unless it had a primary and backup power source. In that case, I would be encouraged to continue firing on it. As a final thought, if you can communicate with the victim, you have to learn what they know. It was never specified what crime Brenda committed, so we can't understand why it would be preferable to risk being tortured to death for the privilege of murdering someone in cold blood, rather than just telling him there was a knife inside the TV stand, and then hoping he'll let you go for doing him a solid. But it speaks to the importance of not being greedy. Next up is the deathbed. From a bird's eye view, this one may actually speak to the wisdom of choosing to let go. As far as we're aware, Art was just keeping an eye on things and making sure no one came in before the timer ran out. If Rigg had never showed up at the motel, there would conceivably be no punishment. It could be he learned his lesson. It could also be that he never figured out the clue or got into an accident along the way. But once he got there, he was on camera and had little choice but to play along. Actually, in the grand scheme of things, I'm not totally sure this played much of a part at all, other than that it provided another clue and gave a chance for Rigg to see things from a new perspective. The trap itself seemed unwinnable, although that's not clear. Ivan was told to choose eyes or lens, and he went for the eyes. But when he pressed the second button, it took off his lens. It was never clarified how to get that second eye lever to drop, but given his background and history, this may have just been a murder device with no conceivable way out. Again, tight timer, fully restrained individual, and just by stepping into it, Rigg potentially put everyone else's life at risk if he chose to try to save this turd, which, incidentally, also calls into question his general philosophy. If he thought his wife may be in trouble, or his two work buddies, how does he determine who to blindly charge in and save? Not only can he not necessarily always save everyone, but saving some may risk the well-being of others. Oh crap, my thought process is beginning to align with that of a serial killer. In addition, by this point, time is running out and things are moving so quickly, there is no real consideration for examining the traps anymore. Everything is loud and hot and close, and we arrive at the arrow joining after it's already over with. He's encouraged to make sure she learned her lesson before letting her go, but the concept of sufficient learning is so subjective. Regardless, he doesn't actually let her go. He leaves that to others, and she is let go with no trouble. There's no real contrivance here to make it a part of the ongoing game, other than the connection between the victims and other players. Switching to the perspective of helping yourself, if ensnared, she had the right idea even if there was no discernible means of her escaping after pulling out the arrows. Unless the arrows themselves could be used to release her from her restraints in some way. It's not clear because, again, this trap had very minimal setup, although it does speak to the agony of drawing a metal object slowly through your flesh, which we discussed in our analysis of Saw 3. Finally, we come to the big daddy of this installment, the ice scale. Now, to approach this one, we have to strip away all pretense provided by the movie. I mean, what is this shit? Art has some sort of back contraption, putting him at risk of getting his neck pinched if he presses the release button before the timer goes off. Hoffman is in on it and in no real danger of being electrocuted, and Rigg's lesson is they were supposed to save themselves? What were the rules or options, and what was being learned here? There was literally nothing to do but wait out the timer. And when given the choice, Eric took the shot he was supposed to take and got his head squished. It's set up as a hard lesson for Rigg regardless of Eric's action, and is designed for death. Without knowing more about Art's contraption for ensuring compliance, it's pretty hard to assess how he could have done more or if he had the time or enough leash to go find alternatives out in the real world. So what's the final verdict? If you're like me, everything would have run fairly smoothly on the back end of this trial. I would have been on the back of an ambulance to be treated for knife wounds subsequent to Brenda's release. Given the information we have available, it seems everything was poised to kill Rigg, knowing he wouldn't be able to let it ride. If he did, I imagine them getting released at the end and just sort of awkwardly standing around for a bit before saying their farewells and heading home for a nice hot shower. Before we go, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. And as an FYI, I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks uncensored movie reviews of Life Force and Under the Skin, with others to be added over time. And if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.